David McFarlane. David, how on earth does something like this happen?
Very good question. And the easy answer is we just don't know at this stage. Um, there did seem to be, looking at the footage earlier this morning, there did seem to be a period of time where the ship's lights went out, which I could only assume was to be a blackout of the ship's main propulsion. Didn't last long, but something like that doesn't have to last long. It can just be a few seconds to enable the ship to veer off course. And that seems to be what's happened. But at this stage, it is purely speculation. We will not know the true cause of these events until the investigators, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, we won't know until they do their preliminary investigations and then come up with a report a few months later.
Yeah, I mean, the ship seemed to drift wildly off course and try to get under the bridge right near the bank, which seemed odd in itself. Then, if you watch it carefully, it looks like it sort of catches the bridge and maybe tries to pull away, and there's an explosion. Now, this isn't necessarily your area of expertise, but half the reason this is so dramatic is the way the bridge collapsed. Like a sardine can or something. Any thoughts, David, as to what happened? Why there was just such a chain reaction on this old, established steel bridge, which just collapsed into the river? What happened, do you think?
As you say, it's not my area of expertise. I'm not a civil engineer, but these bridges were, I'm guessing, is probably about 100 years old. In those days, ships weren't nearly the same size as they are today. And if a risk assessment or some sort of risk occurrence had happened back then it's unlikely they would have even thought about the ship sizes of today. This is not the first bridge hit by any stretch of the imagination in the USA. There was another hit back in 2007 with the ship, the COSCO Busan, under different circumstances. The bridge only suffered superficial damage, and there was a $70 million fine for oil spill cleanup. But certainly these bridges are not designed to withstand an impact from a very large ship like this, which is probably the best part of around about 100,000 deadweight tons.
So far, the services in America have basically said they're not suspecting any sort of foul play. They don't believe it's related to terrorism or anything, despite reports of there having been an explosion on board. I mean, it's very rare we see incidents like this, at least in the West. What do you think? I mean, you say there's no information yet, but it seemed to me that the ship was trying to pass under a part of the river under the part of the bridge that didn't look like its highest possible point. Could it be that tides were higher than expected? That there was a miscalculation as well as potentially some sort of mechanical failure?
That's highly unlikely. There would have been quite detailed calculations before the ship sailed from the dock. The ship also had two pilots on board. The pilots would have shared their information with the master of the ship. They have to do a formal master pilot exchange that details the ship's maneuvering characteristics. The pilots will offer any details regarding the trip down the river, whether there's any dangers in the river. And there's a very, very narrow channel. It's probably narrow enough just for one vessel at a time to pass down there. And she simply veered off that channel, veered off course, and hit the pillar.
David, any thoughts as to what may have happened shortly before the collision? Because there do seem to be reports that this ship lost propulsion and drifted. And then as it approached the bridge at some point, the lights on the boat seemed to have gone out. I don't know if they came back or not. But any theories as to what might have happened to the boat in that respect, insofar as it had only recently left the dock? I mean, are engines at a critical point at that moment? Any thoughts as to why that boat may have lost power?
No, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but before the ship will have sailed from the dock, there would have been numerous checklists to go through, similar to an aircraft checklist. There'd have been checklists for the bridge team. That's the bridge on the ship, not the road bridge. So the master, the navigators, they would have gone through a checklist. The engineer department, they would have gone through checklists. They would have physically tested the engines before the ship departed, and they would also have physically tested the steering gear. That is an international requirement to do so.
And we know that there is an undergoing search and rescue operation still continuing now. I think we understand that there were 20 construction workers working on the bridge at the time of the collision and potentially as many as 12 or more cars. So far, only a couple of people pulled out of the water. One is not in a good way. I think we are probably set to brace ourselves for reports of far more casualties.
Yes, I suppose the only saving grace there is that it happened at early hours in the morning. If that had happened during the morning rush, goodness knows what number of casualties we'd be looking at now. But certainly my thoughts are with those people that are in the water and with the families of those.
David, last question just before you go. Right now, obviously early stages of any kind of investigation into what's gone wrong here. But in terms of the ship, what will they be looking at?
On the ship, there is a voyage data recorder, which is similar to an aircraft black box. So that will have been, or should have been, saved. The emergency button hits. The data of that will probably go to the US Coast Guard. They will analyze that. And in the recording, there will be details of voice on the wheelhouse, the interaction between the pilots and the master and the officer, the helmsman, the lookout. And there will also be images of the radars. All the bridge instrumentation is captured on the data recorder. So that's the main piece of evidence that will be looked at.
Interesting. David, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. David McFarlane there, who is the Director of Maritime Risk and Safety Consultants Limited. James Price is still in the studio with us. I mean, none of us are, I would say, highly qualified to talk about bridge collapses like this, except to say that is some of the most dramatic footage I've ever seen. For a bridge that size, I gather it's, I don't know what this means, but it probably means something. It's like the third longest steel truss bridge in the world. So that kind of a bridge, not a suspension bridge. It's the third biggest, longest in the world of its type. And it went down like a pack of cards.
Yeah, I think I'm more used to metaphorical bridges collapsing in my line of work. But no, it's very dramatic scenes. And I suppose sometimes with these things, you get safety features built in so that they fall apart quite quickly and easily like that. The kind of whether you have a crumple zone in a car and things like that, I suspect this is probably too old for this to be the case. And it may just be the case that this is a freak accident and that several different things had to go really, really wrong for this to happen. Like, we see with something like the Titanic and, it was just a kind of freak accident. The more worrying concern is that we see something like this. We see all these problems with Boeing aeroplanes falling apart all the time. We saw the Suez Canal get blocked up by another large ship crashing. And the people are starting to be slightly concerned now that are we going into something of a competency crisis? That the world that we have built, this very globalized international system, relies on lots of very complicated technical procedures, as well as technologies, as well as bits of mechanics and all these things, all working together very well. And that we are not anymore optimizing for those kinds of competency-based skills. And that's why things are starting to fall apart now, because we're focused on other things.
Yeah, I mean, mercifully, extremely rare to have such a dramatic bridge collapse as that, particularly in the West. I mean, actually, if you are sort of someone who lives in other, maybe more developing world countries, these things happen on a far more regular basis. I believe more recent ones, which we've got pictures of, the collapse of the bridge in Genoa. I think this was relatively in relatively recent history.
That was only recent.
Yeah, that wasn't a great deal of time ago.
Different kind of bridge. That's a suspension bridge,
yeah,
isn't it? But I remember that.
I think 1940 as well, a collapse of a bridge in Tacoma.
In Florida, is that? Have we got that? Yeah, this is the famous one. This is look at that. Look at that. That's a suspension bridge that
Astonishing.
suddenly the wind caught it, and it proved that.
That's wind.
Well, these bridges, suspension bridges, just hang there. That's all they're doing. They're hanging.
Unbelievable.
So this went slightly wrong, and these are legendary pictures. But what it reminds me of, these pictures of all these bridges, particularly the recent one in Baltimore, is that, as you said, James, these are sort of giant structures that sort of help us navigate the world, and we take them for granted. We just never really think about them, do we?
Yeah, absolutely right. We take so much of the modern world for granted, right? We have inherited so much, whether it's the marvels of architecture and engineering like this, whether it's our institutions, whether it's our culture. And that when you don't look after these things, entropy is a natural state of affairs, that things will fall apart. And this is a very sad example of this. And I fear that unless we start refocusing on merit and on achievement and on ability and on competency, we're going to see more of this going on.
Yeah. The only merciful thing about this was it was 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Had that have been, say, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning in the rush hour, I dread to think.
I mean, just looking at those images again of the boat and the amount of stuff, the amount of shipping containers on that thing, these huge megalithic seafaring
Massive,
things that
aren't
bring
they?
all that stuff over from China.